Hello everyone and welcome back to a very special edition of StreamTime Sports. I'm your host Nick Meacham, CEO of Sports Pro, and I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and New Year's break. Now today's episode is what we're calling our episode 200. We're not really sure if it's actually our 200. I for one think we've done more, but I can't back it up as all the pods have been published across multiple back-end channels. But for all intents and purposes, this is it. And to celebrate the milestone, my co-host Chris Stone and I thought it would be fun to take a step back to look at how this show has grown over the years, reminiscing about some of our favorite episode guests and topics, and how basically the sports media landscape has been changing and evolving over the years, and of course, what we should expect in 2026. Now, this episode was recorded just before Chris went on leave at the end of the year, but rest assured, he'll be back with me again, and we aim to make 2026 our best year yet. Now, before we jump in, I just want to share a massive thank you to all of our listeners and viewers who've supported us over the years and who've reached out to share feedback and ideas through our various social media channels. Your support, whether that's through just tuning in, listening to the podcast as you at the gym, or sharing a review on Spotify, subscribing to a YouTube channel, or just the messages you've shared to us directly, are actions and activity we do not take for granted in this very time-poor world we live in today. So thank you again. But without any further ado, it's time for me to hand over to Chris and I for this week's episode. Over to you, Chris.
I was looking it up the other day. It's basically almost 4 years to the date of the original episode coming out that we're recording this. It is a special time, Nick. We've made it very far. I remember some of the statistics that I first heard when you launch a podcast. What is it, like 90-something% of podcasts never make it past 3 episodes or something like that? So, yeah, man, we've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, when you told me that it was 4+ years, I had like 2 in my head. I was like, I've been doing this for over 2 years. Then you said it was 4. That kind of took me by surprise. But no, it's been fun. It's been a lot of... had a lot of interesting and amazing conversations, and been doing it whilst the industry's been going through such huge change. There've been lots of interesting and exciting stories to talk about, and almost like getting our heads around things like in real time while the industry is. It's a really cool time to be doing what we're doing.
100%. I mean, just to go all the way back, and I mentioned this at the outset, the very first episode, there was an interview with Rob Shaw, and I think his job title then might have been like, head of sports sponsorships for Facebook, which is interesting as Facebook now goes by Meta. And in that conversation, I think it's just to bring to light how quickly things change in our industry. You had brought him on because at the time, the Facebooks of the world, the Twitters of the world, which is no longer Twitter anymore, just to talk about how things change. There's a lot of talk about like social media was going to be the new bidders for live sports rights, and the conversation has changed a little bit. It's still the same. Like we were talking about advertising. Now, back then they were talking about, social media, the CPMs they can get from advertising. People spend so much time on their phones, they're going to be the next place for sports media rights. And now we're kind of here 4 years later, and that conversation is basically virtually dead. It's not that there isn't some sports that's on social media, but I think, again, it just goes to your point. If you think about where we started the podcast, the very first guest you had on, the topics we were talking about, some of the social media platforms have been replaced by Netflix and Apple. Advertising part has stuck around a little bit, but it just goes to show how much that has changed over 4 years. I guess, where it's kind of stayed the same, what things have stayed true, but also like how completely different things are as well.
That's a great example, and that's as good an example as you can think of in terms of how transformative the last few years have been in media and consumption, whether it be sports or not. And then you layer in what we've seen from the big players, the Apples, the Netflix and YouTube along the way. Who knows what's next? I mean, and then you think about, obviously, we when we launched this, a big focus is around what's happening from a direct-to-consumer, digital OTT perspective as well. And that's been completely rewritten in the last couple of years. So it has been a heck of a run.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we'll go a little trip down memory lane, do some favorites, things that, people should go back on. Because even though we've said some of the things in the industry have changed, there are things that absolutely still are true. Sometimes there's lessons to be learned and where things have pivoted. So maybe, Nick, we'll just kind of start like, is there a particular episode, one that sticks out for you? We'll probably have a list because I've certainly have multiple ones that stick to my mind. But what's the first one maybe you want to go back on and say really sticks out in my mind is, one that I really enjoyed or took a lot from, or I still come back to?
Yeah, there's been so many great conversations and great podcasts, mainly when we're together.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've had a lot of good. I think we've had a lot of good conversations over the years. But the guest wise, the ones that really stand out was the first pod we did with David Guinan. I think when he started, firstly talking about his background, which was a heck of a journey to get to that point. Some of the crazy stories. I think I can't remember what country it was in. Was it Senegal or
Uganda?
No, it was somewhere in Africa where he had some. It was crazy stories that involved some tribes and
tribes,
and
dictatorship,
that was caught me off guard because I wasn't ready for that. I thought we're just ready to talk about a direct-to-consumer platform and its performance. But then when he got into the detail and really was able to articulate what it's really like to go through that journey of launching a platform and leading that through, and then giving some insight into the partners they work with. It was just refreshing to get someone to give a full picture of themselves and of the journeys they're going through, where sometimes we can have guests that, let's face it, are very cautious about what they want to say. But he's been a real shining light, and obviously we've had him on more than once now.
Yeah, and just to recap that, those don't know or don't remember, haven't seen that episode, definitely go back, was when he launched the Cowboy channel, and he talked about basically launching that from scratch, and at some point, reaching close to 100,000 subscribers. But he talked about along the way, the headaches of all of a sudden they launched this platform, and they had tens of thousands of people trying to log on to the platform all at the same time, and they didn't have the servers to do that, and the system crashed. And he basically told the story. I think there were only like 9 or 10 people working there, and he had all of them basically put a pause on their day jobs, and they went and physically manually called every single person from a customer service perspective to rebuild the trust. And I imagine there are things like that happen more often than we're aware of, but very few people that are like that candid about like, hey, this is what failed and this is what we did afterwards. And he's launched Table Tennis TV, and just from David, it's hard to find a lot of people that are that candid and open about it. So definitely both of his interviews stick out.
Yeah, and also this is a good reminder about how important that personal touch is, because it ultimately did deliver great results. And I love how his accountability on that is like, it's my job to make sure that if this 70-year-old person is trying to log on, that I can get them across the line as seamlessly as possible and do whatever it takes, even if it was giving his phone number out to all their customers, which I found quite funny. But that was one of my favorite pods. The Palk FC one is definitely a standout. And I think when we did that one, I knew the story going, but again, what I've liked about those is I knew a bit of the story, but when you start hearing it talked through in detail, your eyes start lighting up and you go, whoa, that's actually a really, really cool story and bigger and better than I expected.
Yeah, that's our friend Peniatis. I just apologize. I'm not going to butcher his last name, but yeah, Palk out in Greece, one of the major football clubs out there. And he was explaining the story. And actually how it came up is they had won one of the media awards, but they had won an award for Best New Platform. And that was the whole thing as they launched it. And at the time, again, looking at things that we used to talk about 4 years ago, and we're still kind of talking about today, was if you can't get the media rights that you think that you deserve, can you use the threat of going direct to consumer as a way to basically drive some of those negotiations? And basically the story in the Palk one, and I believe the name of the podcast is called something like David versus Goliath. So go search it so you can go and watch it. It's still relevant today. But he basically talked about they didn't get the rights value that they thought they deserved. And in Greece, the clubs could individually negotiate those deals, unlike at the league level, like the Premier League and NFL. So they went and launched a DTC platform. But from his story, they basically launched it like 2 weeks before the season started, very short term. Like, how do we go from having no platform to be able to take on subscriptions? It was similar to David, where they were having to explain to people like, this is how you pay for it. This is how you subscribe to it. How can we get it on smart TVs? And, it ended up being a real success, but lots of crazy things happening along the way. And then spoilers, but it's still worth listening to. The next year, they basically ended up shutting it down. And part of it was because they said UEFA wouldn't count it towards some of their financial fair play money. But also they ended up getting a deal with the broadcasters, which I think they said was like double what they were offered the year before. So then it goes to show, like, can you always use D2C as a way to threaten broadcasters to do it? In their case, they were able to do it.
And obviously, there are these examples we're sharing are of, let's say, challenger businesses doing so. But there are great stories about what can happen when you do it right. And I remember that example that Peniatis gave. I think they did it for like 40,000 euros or something crazy cheap. Where you think about the millions that's been injected into some platforms. You can do it on a shoestring and prove out the case. I think that's been really the learning that I've seen across the entire industry. Is there's been a lot of what sounds great on paper, this idealistic, like long-term play when launching a direct-to-consumer platform. But the real success stories are the ones that have taken a very pragmatic, very bottom-up approach, and they've got amazing results off the back of those. Another conversation I had that really stands out for me was when I got the chance to speak with Marie Donahue, who at that time was obviously at Amazon and Prime Video and leading their strategy there. And it was interesting just to hear about how they approached at Amazon, how they approached decision-making around big decisions like sports rights. And it's just like bring a one-page paper document, put it in front of Jeff Bezos, and he'll give you a yes or no, is all that was required there. But to hear how thoughtful and how strategic they were with trying to get more value out of than just those rights. And she was great to talk to on and off the stage. She's now I think at DraftKings, if I remember correctly, or FanDuel, one of those big players that, but again, basically didn't have more on our radar a few years ago.
No, yeah, and that happens quite a bit where you see some of these stories blow up. And I'm thinking, there's some of our favorite episodes. I'm thinking maybe now more along some of the personalities, the particular individuals. And I think for me, again, we're going down memory lane, is one of the people I have incredible amount of respect for, and sort of just kind of opening mind was Peter Scott, who at the time was at Turner Sports. And that was kind of off the back of the first Sports Pro OTT USA event we hosted down at the Turner Studios in Atlanta, which was really great because they had the NBA on TNT studios with, Shaq and all those guys. Like, they weren't necessarily there, but we got to do the content on those stages. At the time, Bleacher Report had Champions League. So we're doing the event on these real world stages and things like that. And that was the first time I got to meet Peter. And then we got to bring him on for a podcast. And one of the things about Peter Scott, if you've met him, great. If you'll agree with everything I want to say. If you haven't, go find him on LinkedIn, reach out to him, sort of thing. Peter Scott was just such an incredibly intelligent individual. I think one of the things I find is there are some really smart people, but they're not always able to communicate things. The thing I loved about Peter Scott is I'm not a tech guy, but he explained things for me to be able to understand. I think people that have that gift to explain a foreign concept to someone in a way you can understand is a really special thing. Peter Scott, he's just a really smart guy. The thing I took away from him, and I think you're starting to see a little bit of it now. One, he talked about highlights are going to be more valuable than live rights. That was a comment he made. Yeah, it's a comment he made 2 or 3 years ago, and we talked about, Adam Silver got a little bit of heat for saying that. We just talked about the ECB was talking about that. So this is something Peter said 2-3 years ago. And then one of the other things he said that's coming out is he was like, what I really think is valuable is how many ways can you redistribute the same piece of content to a unique audience. So I think at the time he said, you want someone that's just really into football? Okay, we'll have a football one. But maybe someone's really into betting. So how can we simulcast something that's directly for the betting? So it's talking about live odds in real time. But then also, how can we do something that's geared toward kids? So then that's like the Nickelodeon broadcast. And his thing was like, I'm looking for technology or ways to basically take the same sports stream, but how many ways, instead of a one-to-many approach, how can I have a many-to-one approach? And I feel like you're starting to see some of these simulcast, alternative broadcasting with sports creators. Like, there's a lot of stuff Peter Scott talked about sort of 3 years ago. Some of that stuff does seem to be what's kind of coming to the fold right now.
I mean, you literally listed every major change and trend that I can think of in the last few years. So yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I think I need to go back to listen to that, see if there's any other nuggets there so I can take them from my own for the next podcast. But yeah, Pete was great. And he's good at like just simplifying something. I think he could be that ideal conduit, I think, between like the business and the tech side. If you need someone to explain, like, how's this tech going to impact us, and he can just distill that into something really valuable. So he was great. One of my favorite personalities we've had was David Gandler, who we've had on the podcast a couple of times. Who is the CEO and co-founder of Fubo TV, and has been someone that we've. He's been really honest and open in the industry about the challenges, about how the bigger players have been acting. And he was getting a little bit of heat for how outspoken he was on some of these things.
I believe he used the word cartel.
He's the and actually, but all his points have been validated both by the growth of Fubo, because people are saying, Fubo can't work. Well, he's actually proved that out. They've delivered what they said they would. And now they've been acquired by Disney and going to be all part of that ecosystem. And he was even rumored to be one of the targets for a potential CEO at Disney. So who knows if that ever will play out. But my point is he was direct. He was specific. He wasn't afraid to pull punches. And actually, I think I mentioned this on a previous pod before, but he told us that because they went through this whole sort of case with those other major players when they were launching the venue product, that our pod was one of the ones referenced in some of the court case materials. And I looked on the analytics for those pods, and they have a little bit of a spike for normal, distinctly a few months after that pod was recorded. But no, he's been great. Great to have him. Great to see his basically everything that he was saying has been validated, because sometimes you just don't know where it's going to go, and he's the proof's in the pudding, clearly.
Yeah. And just, we'll come back to guests and speakers and things like that, but maybe some other bits. You and I, we've been doing this for 4 years now. I guess, funny moments, behind the scene moments, things you potentially learned. I mean, I think for me, like, people might not know this, and they probably won't never talk about it. Like, when we set up the pod, like, I've always described to guests, like, I'm the color commentator, you're the analyst. My job is to kind of keep things flowing, inject a little banner, things like that. I feel like with the podcast, like, I'm usually more the free flowing guy, and you come with the notes and prepared, and like just sort of the way we go about doing our podcast a little bit. I think we have a good relationship between the two of us, but I think sometimes just maybe a little behind the scenes, like you said, I try to give you the information, but I'm very much kind of a, don't worry, Nick, I got this. And you're a little bit like, please, could you just provide me a little bit more information beforehand?
Yeah, sadly, I'm still never really comfortable in speaking in public settings, even though when we do these, it's more private. I'm conscious that I can babble on a little bit, so I like to be prepared. But you're annoyingly good at just stepping up with a mic in hand or just in front of a crowd and getting it done. So it's good that we have that yin and yang effect, I suppose. But yeah, when I do find when I get the chance to prepare my thoughts, that I can articulate them a little bit better. Otherwise, I'm just probably all over the place. And thankful for anyone who's still listening to the pod after all these years.
Yeah, and in terms of like the speaking side of it, like you and I obviously do the podcast together, but we're also quite frequently on stage at events. Like, how do you, just on your personal level, view doing this versus being on stage?
I remember actually what really kicked off doing content like the way we do it was actually COVID, when we started doing all these online events. Mm-hmm. And that was really the first time I stepped into doing content generally. Even on stage, I'd done very little prior to then. And someone who's a mentor in the industry who told me, like, you need to be more active. You're the CEO of the company. You have to be out there and public facing more. So I took that on and started to get more involved. And I remembered how nervous I would get to do every single of those sessions that we would do online for the various online events we ran. And that was my first taste test. And look, it depends what role I'm playing. If I'm doing a moderator role, asking questions, I'm pretty comfortable these days. But previously, I worried way too much about it. Doing presenting and stuff, I find it's still incredibly difficult to overcome. But that's where good preparation can help a little bit, and not too much coffee beforehand.
Yeah. I mean, I was in a similar boat with you. I think the first time I did it, was when we launched the Insider Series, which again was a product of COVID. And I can remember at the time, like, the first couple of Insider Series, there were like 600 people tuning in virtually. Like, they were pretty incredible numbers.
I think we had one over 1,000 at one stage. We're like, what? How is 1,000 people like watching this webinar that we're running? But that was everyone was looking for things to do at that time. We're trying to work it out.
Yeah, and I can remember sat there just being like, holy shit, like, I was just, there's 600 people watching.
If we had our own YouTube channel, we're getting 1,000 concurrents running, we'd be raking it in from the creator ecosystem. So that's a good sign of things to come, maybe.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, like, my background, like, I played football through high school, played football through college, D3, stuff like that. Like, I played a high school football game, like a playoff game. There were like 10,000 people there. Like, and that was like, let's go do this. Whereas like 600 people in front of a screen, like, even though there's no one there, there's a lot of, oh God, like, I just got a little clammed up, a little nervous, sort of stuttering.
I think I find it difficult when I'm trying to say something almost word for word. Yeah. That's where I find it really difficult. When I'm just talking a bit more free flowing and I've got the chance to just find my way through it, I'm in a bit of a better place. I think it's a legacy of like high school. I mean, Americans are always so bloody good at these things, talking. I remember sometimes I've listened to sessions either or interviews we've done on the podcast or people speaking at our events. I'm like, oh man, that guy sounded so awesome on stage. And then I reflect, actually, he didn't say anything. He just was playing the most political. if you proverbial straight bat in cricket, basically didn't give us anything, but it just sounded much more engaging to listen to than some other people might do when they're maybe a bit nervous, but actually they're telling you stuff that's really insightful.
Yeah.
So that's taken a little while to get used to, but it's been great for me for that purpose to basically get me out of my shell to get more comfortable with that stuff as well.
Yeah. In terms of being nervous and going back to some of the content stuff, is there a particular one that got you nervous? Because I know for me, like, I think one of my other, like, just general favorite episodes, because it was a little bit different to some of the stuff we've done in the past, but one that I was genuinely, like, was nervous about was when we interviewed Timo Lume. At the time, we had set up sort of a Hall of Fame and to recognize people for the long-term impact they had. And Timo basically had literally just retired from his role at the IOC, was one of the people behind the TOPS sponsorship program there, basically built the IOC into what it is in the Olympics today, and I'm sure played a part in the OBS and things like that. So we were kind of interviewing him. He's freshly retired. He's in our Hall of Fame, like, genuinely probably one of the pioneers in the sports media space. And, like, here I am, like, 4 or 5 years out of university, like, interviewing this guy. And, like, I remember being genuinely like, interesting. Like, a little, like, I find with all these interviews, like, after, like, the first couple questions, like, I'm just sort of in a flow at that point. I don't think about it, but, like, I was genuinely there, like, wow, this guy's like, I can't screw this up.
No, that was a great conversation. I wasn't too worried about that one. But he made us very comfortable quite quickly into that. And what was great about some of those conversations, we learned a little bit more about the person, where he just gave us a little bit of insight into him and his career. And I loved hearing those stories. I'd love to do more of those where you just you get some great anecdotes, particularly from Timo, and John Miller is another example where they got some incredible stories to tell. There's the one that he shared, John Miller shared, which was when they launched, because basically what I think is lost on some people that the NBC actually launch competitions, launch events sometimes. They create assets and events that they can then go monetize through their channels. And I don't know if they launched it or they bought the rights to the dog competition?
It's like the RKC or something like that.
Oh,
and it's talking.
It's like a dog race.
Kennel Club.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Show, yeah.
And apparently it blew up. It got incredible ratings during.
I watched it with my family. We'd watch it, and we'd watch all the dogs.
And that's where he was like, that's the best deal. I think it was the best deal that he had ever done. I think he said it was, because it basically cost them nothing, got incredible ratings, and they're able to generate a lot of revenue from it for years on afterwards. And it just shows that how success can come from the most random places.
Yeah. And maybe the other side, just, we've talked about sort of success stories, but maybe some things like maybe haven't gone the way people have. Because I remember, and this isn't a shout at him, it's just more like it's the very first video interview we'd ever done, and that was with Charlie Beal. And at the time, if people can remember, just out of COVID, there's about a 6-month period where you couldn't go to an event where there wasn't at least 2 slides in every presentation that was talking about the Web3 and the metaverse. And then we also had the conversation with Round 1 Football and the launch of what they were trying to do with Web3. And then I think still to this day, one of our most popular episodes is what took place with you and Alexander Dreyfus at Socios.
Yeah. Yep.
And we've had conversations around Web3. Now, I'm still bullish about Web3. I think long-term it will play. I have reasons for that. I can get into them. But, like, it is something, we did some podcasts, and it's nothing against those people. There were lots of positive signs for it. And like I said, I'm still bullish about it. But, like, we did do some podcasts around Web3, and, that's maybe not developed the way they were. Even Ryan Spoon, who's moved on to multiple places, did an interview.
He's a head of president of Yahoo now,
There you go, yeah.
Yahoo Sports and News, I think.
Yeah. So, yeah, we had a couple of but, the Web3 stuff's maybe not taking off the way it was. Is there anything else you can maybe kind of think of, or topics that, maybe, fast? It doesn't feel like maybe there's a time we talked about fast quite a bit. Is there anything else that sort of over 4 years we talked about that we thought was going to maybe boom that...
Well, we've got to share before we move on to what you got named as a result of doing a Web3 session at one of our events. I think it was at Singapore. And it was called the Jargon Buster on Web3. So basically trying to distill and give people a bit of an insight into what it all means. And you can finish your story.
So, it was to your point. It was when all the Web3 stuff was going on. So basically, it was called the Jargon Buster, to just basically, like, what is blockchain? What is Web3? Just to, like, provide some definitions for people that maybe haven't heard any of these things. And we had a guest there who English wasn't their first language, and they heard Jargon Buster, and they thought that was my name. So I was called the Jurgen Booster. So, I know Steve McCaskill has definitely been on this podcast and referred to me in that name before, but if you ever heard a Sports Pro, then you ever hear him podcast, I do have the name as the Jurgen Booster because I like to give. Well, I don't necessarily like to give, but I have on occasion given presentations doing jargon busters.
Yeah, Mr. Jurgen Buster was used a lot in the office for quite a while after that one. It was quite a classic. I mean, look, the things that have not played out, I guess the way the industry was expecting was definitely around the OTT proposition. I think we did raise that over the years about how we're going to see success. That whole notion of if they build it, will it come?
Yeah.
We started talking about that a long time ago. I'd say we basically predicted that it was going to be harder than everyone else was thinking. Also, we'll take the credit there if the people who were listening would have worked it out early. That's probably the main one. I think also the how you talk about social media Facebook and then basically is one of these platforms where live rights they were hoping that basically they were going to come in for live rights. I think just this incredible focus now just on YouTube as this what is YouTube for the future is something that I didn't think would play out the way that it has. And actually most of the social channels are really in the sports media conversation are really put on the back burner. Now they're kind of seen in a very different light, whereas YouTube is really pushing that they are TV. They're the future of basically sports consumption as well. That's just something that really was on the radar a couple of years ago.
We've always kind of danced around a little bit some of the original content stuff. I mean, God knows how many times over 4 years we've referenced Drive to Survive and stuff like that. But like what I would love to do, because they're one of my favorite series of documentaries, and it feels like they've slowed down, or it feels like with the ESPN Plus, the way they're distributed doesn't come across the same. I would love to speak to someone from the original days, speaking original content, like who did the original ESPN 30 for 30s, because those are some of my favorite sports documentaries, like the Pony Excess. It's all about the U. Like there was a while some of those documentaries were like awesome, incredible, and like I would love to kind of be able to get more of a story on like what happened when Red Zone was launched, like who brought the idea to NFL Network. Like I think I would like to do some like historical pods.
Yeah, I'm interested in that you focused on content titles as your focus. I'd love to go more historical because I think they're great. Normally you find great stories. None of those major titles or things that have been achieved happen in a very traditional way, like following a traditional startup playbook. They normally happen with some really weird moments along the way. Looking the one that exists in Australia that's a big topic is the launch of the Cricket World Cup. Cricket one day version, where there was boycotting. There was all these stories, which was run by Kerry Packer, who was a billionaire in Australia, who also owned Channel 9, the major network. And I'd love to have talked to him. I think he's passed away now. I'd love to have talked to him about that whole journey. And David Hill was the guy who led that, which is a very famous broadcast executive these days. I would love to get the full brief on the DAZN launch journey. We've talked about DAZN a lot over the years, and I'd love to I've had bits off record about it, but to get that full picture and spectrum of like, how did that platform come to be? I have an idea, but I'd love to hear some of the stories and challenges that they faced along the way. And how do they get Len Blavatnik to give them billions and millions and billions of dollars to drive that forward? That would be a heck of an interesting story.
See what we can do, DAZN, perform, whoever. I think maybe an underrated topic, and maybe I should have given you a bit of time to think about this beforehand, is can you think of anybody that had like a really great like background? Because like obviously we do these interviews and like we've had stuff in person, so like stuff we did at the Olympic Stadium was really lovely. You got to do some really cool stuff at the Kia Oval that looked really great. That stuff almost feels like a bit of a cheat code. But like when we're interviewing people, like we've had some people do it from their cars. I've had people do it from parking garages. I've had people do it from airport waiting lobbies. Like, is there anyone you remember that maybe had one you're like, ooh, that's great.
One that stands out, I think it was a pod, was with Deirdre Lester.
I think it might have been an Insider Series, but I like where you're going. She's definitely out there, yeah.
Yeah, she we turned on for this interview. I don't think, were we both on that, or was it?
I think Jeff Nathanson might have moderated it.
I don't know. This is always how bad my memory is. But basically, we turned her on, and she was just sitting there in front of a fire, like a massive fireplace, but like the fire was burning, and like,
lovely.
What? Like, this is not what I expected to walk into that shop, but it was a pretty big. Linked with that basically is that she is now the CEO of Teton Ridge. Do you know who Teton Ridge is? They bought the Cowboy Channel. There you go. Full circle. We've come full circle.
Full circle. That's great.
Have you got any other backgrounds? I'm trying to remember, racking my brain.
Zach Leonsis at Monumental.
Oh, I'm really weird. Yes.
I don't know if it was directly at the stadium or the arena, but like incredible background, all the
Trophies galore in the back row.
Yeah, Zach Leonsis had a really good one, a Monumental. I'm trying. Yeah, it's just like I said, we've had people in cars, we've had people in airport waiting rooms, like we've had people kind of all over the place. I mean, you used to be able, like, we had someone record from a beach one time. They were on a holiday somewhere. But I think their villa was out over the beach. So like, you could see in the background. So it wasn't like
that rings a bell.
Reminds you of your Jamaica days.
Yeah, I didn't quite have the beach backdrop at any stage, which I got asked a lot. In fact, when I let a lot of people down when I had to tell them that actually I live in I'm in the cellar of a gated compound in the middle of a capital city. Not quite as glamorous as most people thought.
Well, what do you think about the future? Where do we don't necessarily want these big bold take guys that just say things for the sake of it, but obviously the media summit's coming up. There'll be some things covered there, but we've spent 4 years talking. Some things have changed, some things haven't changed. What are you looking forward to? Or maybe they're individual businesses or things like that. Let's say we get to 300. Maybe we won't go another 4 years. Let's be a little bit more.
But we're gonna ramp up. We're gonna do 4 a week for next week, and we're gonna get to 400 by next year or the year after. Look, I'd say the things I'm going to be following over the next 12 months is basically what the big streamers are doing, because they seem to be making a lot of headway now. We were wondering for a while what they were going to do. In fact, we talked about this, and I said I can't see why Netflix would go into sports, and here we are. They're going into sports hard, but they're also changing the way sports is consumed, using advertising as a primary mechanism, making it free to access. They're just taking a different approach, and that could have a real knock-on effect to how sports is consumed. But historically, for many years, it's been going because of cable and pay TV, being locked away behind paywalls and democratizing that access. So I'm really interested to see how far that goes. And if people will really lean into YouTube in the way that we're seeing all this testing going on with like lower tier sports properties, what the Bundesliga is done in the UK. I'm just excited to see, is that going to keep going? Are we going to get to a point where YouTube is the place that they are going to, as in and more premium rights are going to be going there for free and with rev share, or whether that will peter out a little bit and you'll see a resurgence of the traditional players finding their own ways of connecting audiences again through connected TVs and their own dedicated platforms.
There's 2 things I want to keep an eye on, and I'll let you respond to them because I'm sure you'll have thoughts and opinions on them. The first one would be, we're seeing a lot of mergers in the media space. You think about like how much stuff Paramount Plus has recently pulled under its umbrella, and you think about things like, Sky's looking to sell off parts of, Sky Deutschland and things like that. And there's all these mergers of businesses. Even, you referenced David Gandler and Fubo now being a part of the Disney family. I'm really curious to see what happens with all these mergers. Do more and more players end up coming together so that basically, do we just rebundle and everybody's just back in the same place? So I am curious to see kind of what happens, because it does feel like even things like the TKO merger, 12, 16, 18 months ago, that sort of stuff. Just really kind of curious to see how that whole landscape comes together. If more of those mergers do happen, if they do happen, what does that mean? And then the other one, and we have talked about it, League One being the biggest one, I really am curious to see in 4 years' time, have we hit a peak with media rights values in Europe, or do they keep going up, or do they start to go back up again? If they do peak, or if they have peaked, or if they start to go down, what does that mean for the marketplace long term? Because it seems like the U.S. seems to keep doing it. I don't know how. So, will the NFL next year? I'm sure it freaking will, because it always does. So I am interested to see sort of how that growth goes in Europe and what that means if it doesn't go back up. And like I said, the mergers and acquisitions, those are things that I'll be curious to see over the next 100 episodes, 200 episodes, how much that stuff goes.
Yeah, big time. I'd say I'd wrap with this. I'd say that to your points, I think you'll see more happening at that big scale in terms of mergers and acquisitions. I'm really intrigued again to see whether DAZN goes IPO or not. But whether the big tech companies do start merging together. There's all the speculation now with Warner Brothers Discovery, who's going to buy them. And also, the media rights bubble, I think, has really burst. If you took out football from Europe, where's the money in media rights? It's not really there. So look, it's a difficult landscape. There's going to be a lot more disruption to come, and I'm excited to be talking about it over the coming episodes.
Yeah. Well, everyone, like I said at the beginning, whether you're here been since episode 1 or episode 199, whatever it is, we do appreciate being a part of the journey over these 200-ish episodes. As of recording this, now 4 years long. So thank you again, everybody. And Nick, thank you. It's been a ride.
Thanks, babe.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.